It's Casino City's coverage of the 2008 World Series of Poker.
Welcome to Las Vegas, where we just witnessed poker history. 22-year-old Peter Eastgate from Denmark just beat Ivan Demidov from Russia to become the youngest World Series of Poker main event champion. He beat Phil Hellmuth's record, who was 24 when he won it in 1989, and Eastgate just took home $9.1 million. I'm Vin Narayanan alongside Gary Trask. Gary, what impressed you the most about watching Eastgate play Demidov?
There's a couple things about Eastgate, Vin, that I was really impressed with. Number one, very rarely makes a mistake. If you watch the coverage on ESPN during the main event, he's calm, he's cool, he's collected. Very rarely will make a bad call or a bad decision. Number two, he's a great heads-up player. He's one of the best heads-up players online, and now you have to consider him one of the best heads-up players in live poker tournaments. I think once he got into heads-up play, got the big stack, there was no turning back.
I'll tell you what else impressed me about him. He was aggressive. He raised and raised and raised. And in fact, Dennis Phillips, who we talked to a little later after he was eliminated, he just said, you know, Eastgate raised all the time, and I was just glad he was on my right.
Yeah, nobody really knew what to make of him. He was quiet coming into it. No, there wasn't a lot of talk about Peter Eastgate coming into the tournament, coming into even the November 9 and the days before. So I think once they got to the table, what was interesting was when we talked to some of the players that got eliminated on Sunday, they all mentioned Eastgate as one of the best players. There wasn't a lot of talk about him before, but I think the players knew that he was a threat going into the November 9.
All right, we'll get to more on what happened at the final table and heads-up play in a moment. But first, let's go back and look at how we got here. In a final table filled with wild momentum swings and an epic bad beat, Eastgate and Ivan Demidov outlasted and outplayed the rest of the November 9 Sunday to reach heads-up play on Monday. As final table play began Sunday at the Penn and Teller Theater in the Rio All-Suite Hotel and Casino, Dennis Phillips had the biggest cheering section and the largest chip stack. But the normally steady trucking account manager from St. Louis rode a roller coaster chip ride and finished in third place.
Like I said, I came in there with the idea that I was going to try to win this thing, and I got a little nuts at the beginning. Got all the way down to the 4 or 5 million that I had left, and then I had to tighten up and play solid. And I think I outplayed several people, a few different hands in there to get climbing back up. But, you know, the entire day I had pocket queens once, pocket jacks once, and the next best hand was pocket eights for 12 hours of playing. I didn't have too good hands.
In the most dramatic hand of the day, Scott Montgomery, holding a sizable chip stack, went all in pre-flop against Eastgate with ace-3 suited. Montgomery picked up an ace on the flop and an ace on the turn for trip aces, but a 6 on the river gave Eastgate, who had called with pocket sixes, a full house. Unlike Phil Hellmuth, Montgomery was gracious in defeat.
I actually said, oh, so the 6 of diamonds is the only one left, so I gotta have to catch a diamond on the turn. So when the 6 of diamonds comes on the river, he won't beat me, but I didn't catch the diamond on the turn, so when the 6 did come on the river, I lost.
Right.
I mean, I was behind when I put the money in, so I don't consider that a suck out. I mean,
while seeing Eastgate and Demidov advance to heads-up play might have come as a surprise to casual fans, their fellow pros at the table were practically predicting it.
You know, it's tough to discount Demidov and because of his late run, and I really like Peter Eastgate. I think he's very talented. He always puts you on your heels. And
in heads-up play, the tide turned for Eastgate when he caught Demidov trying to bluff his way through a 44 million chip pot. Eastgate's flush won the hand and crippled Demidov. A few hands later, Eastgate hit his wheel draw to send Demidov packing. Eastgate, who had to wait 117 days just to begin the final table, said he never dared dream he could win the main event.
A win will be extraordinary. Like, you would be remembered for forever in poker history as being a world champion. So yeah, it's a very prestigious title.
Have you always thought about winning this?
No, I didn't dream of it. Like, I didn't even dream of making the final table.
Demidov played strong poker throughout the 2-day final table, but he knew he was up against a tough opponent.
He's a very strong player with a lot of heads-up experience. I think.
Gary, before the final table started, you picked Eastgate to win the tournament in a great pick in one of your columns. What did you see in Eastgate that made you say, "Hey, this guy's going to win it"?
There were a couple things. First of all, I didn't want to pick the favorite. The easy way out would have been to pick Dennis Phillips, who had the big stack and proved that he can play with the big stack. The other favorite was Ivan Demidov, who, you know, was playing as good as anybody coming into the tournament. Coming into the November 9, he had finished in the final table at World Series of Poker in Europe. So those are the two guys that I think everyone was picking, but that's no fun. Eastgate was 5-1. He was obviously well within striking distance to win the thing. And as I mentioned before, he's a great heads-up player. So if you got a guy that's 5-1, who's going to be more dangerous as the tournament goes along, and you got to grab him. Secondly, his composure. You watch him on ESPN, and we saw him live. I mean, he doesn't get rattled. He's got a bulldog, like steely-eyed face.
And like most Scandinavians, he's aggressive. And when you get down to the final table, you need an aggressive demeanor if you're going to win.
He's aggressive and he's composed. I mean, even last night after he'd won it, he's sitting there with $9.1 million sitting in front of him, the gold bracelet, about 40 members of the media, lights, camera. He's 22 years old, and he looked like he was just sitting in his living room. So, I mean, he's really a very composed 22-year-old, and he's a very rich 22-year-old right now.
Now, the 117-day break, this is the first time the World Series of Poker has tried it. They paused the final table back in July, and then they resumed play in November. What did you think? How do you think that worked out for the World Series?
I think for the World Series, it worked out great. You know, a lot of the poker purists, like yourself, didn't like the break. The players were very outspoken. Even the players in the November 9 didn't like the break. The World Series of Poker did it to gain more attention, to gain more exposure. And if you looked at the crowds inside the Penn and Teller Theater, nobody expected those kind of crowds. There were people, we talked to a person that got there at 2 in the morning on Sunday for the tournament that started at 10 a.m. the next morning, 8 hours before the play started. We talked to somebody last night who got in line at 5 o'clock Vegas time. The tournament didn't start till 10 o'clock. People were waiting in line all day long. The place was packed. And I don't think you can get away from the fact that they got what they wanted out of this. They got exposure. They got a huge live audience to watch poker.
Well, I agree with you on the sense that Harrah's in the World Series of Poker is the big winner of this. No one knew who was going to win. Everyone was talking about who was going to win. The ratings for the World Series of Poker are up. But for the actual players, I think it's a different story. And it's a different story in a couple fronts. One of the reasons why the World Series of Poker put this break into play is they wanted the players to get more sponsorship deals and earn a little bit more money for themselves. The fact of the matter is, their shirts and their sweatshirts, they weren't flooded with logos and patches or anything like that. Most of them were wearing just the 2 or 3 patches, and it was from the online poker rooms that had sponsored them to begin with. So you had that aspect of it. The other thing is it really hurt some of the players. If you take a look at Dennis Phillips was a runaway truck in July, and no one knew how to play him. And when he sat down at the final table on Sunday, it was a completely different ballgame. Every time Phillips got in a pot, he was raised and re-raised, and people popped back at him, even though he was playing classic big stack poker. People had a chance to study and take a look at his play and really take a measure of him. I mean, to Phillips' credit, after he lost a bunch of chips, he tightened up, he changed up his game, and he was able to come back and finish in 3rd place. But that, if you didn't have that break, there's a good chance that we'd be talking about Dennis Phillips winning the main event World Series of Poker Championship.
2 things on that. Number one, Phillips said before the November 9 started, he embraced the break. He liked the break. He thought he was a better player, and he thought it helped him. It turned out it didn't help him, but he coming in, he liked the 117-day break because he thought it helped him. Number 2, the logos, you're right. They didn't get sponsorships they were looking for. I think everyone was surprised by that. But you think if they do this again next year, will they get more logos? Now they got all this exposure, TV ratings are way up. There's thousands of people watching it. I think they may get the logos next year.
Well, the ratings were way up, but I think a couple of the players, Kelly Kim and Chino Riem in particular, made an interesting point about the logos. The way the broadcast coverage works out, you don't actually see the players who are going to be in the final table until the last couple of weeks of the broadcast, and that's a really short time frame to sign up sponsorship, especially when budget money was completed. But I did think the one great thing, and I mean fantastic thing that happened about the break is the crowds it brought to the Rio. Unbelievable. I mean, you had thousands of people yelling and chomping and stomping and cheering their favorite players out. It was fantastic. Felt like we were at a Super Bowl.
It did. I wrote on CasinoCity.com that it was like a March Madness game. It was like a prized heavyweight boxing match. I mean, they had introductions. We had Michael Buffer there last night. I mean, it was an event, and that's what they were looking for. You know, they're not making any commitments to what they're going to do next year, but I have to think from the crowd exposure that they got and from the TV ratings, they're going to do it again.
And the fans even had time to work out cheers. I mean, you had Kelly Kim. I mean, they were just spelling his name out every time he was in a hand.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Peter Eastgate, his crowd was singing a weird Uba, Uba, Uba song in Danish. Yeah. It was absolutely amazing, and the fans were just soaking it up and enjoying every minute.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, it was a lot of fun. Well, that's all we have for now. Reporting live from Las Vegas, I'm Vin Narayanan, that's Gary Trask, and we'll catch you next time.